Hi, welcome to this webinar about getting ahead with 10.3 Architect Edition. My name is Marco Cantu and I'm one of the product managers for RAD Studio, and I'm coordinating this webinar that has contributions by different product teams at Embarcadero and Idera. We're going to cover an overview of RAD Studio 10.3 and the Architect Edition. Then we're going to see contributions covering and introducing Aqua Data Studio, RunX Studio, and Sencha XJS, which are the other tools that are part of the Architect license for RAD Studio 10.3. At the end, I also provide a quick introduction to RAD Server and the modernization of architectures that it offers, and cover the licensing of RAD Server with the Architect Edition. What is RAD Studio? It's the ultimate IDE that has both C++ and Delphi language support. It lets you design, code, debug, and test cross-platform applications, deploying them to mobile and desktop. And the application are built with native performance and provide access to the hardware on all platforms. Some of the key new features in 10.3 Rio are the support of C++ 17 for Win32, new Delphi language features, FireMonkey Android Z Order, and API level 26 support. Enhancements for Windows 10 support, specifically on the VCL side with high DPI improvements and store support. Extensive IDE UI modernization, and some RAD Server architecture extensions I'll also mention later on, and a lot of quality and performance improvements. We have webinars and other content that highlights more in detail all of these new features in 10.3 Rio. But what I want to cover here is the different options for buying RAD Studio and specifically what's in Architect. So we have a community edition, which is free for non-professional use and is focused on letting students and hobbyists use the tool if they're not making any significant revenue with it. We have a professional edition that now includes mobile support and IB Lite, the interface database for mobile. And then we have an enterprise edition, which includes multi-tier support in forms of DataSnap and RAD Server, the full FireDAC support with all enterprise level database drivers, a single RAD Server deployment license, and also the encrypted version of IB Lite, IB2Go, available for free for mobile deployment. These features are relevant because, of course, they're also included in the Architect Edition that includes mobile, includes DataSnap, RAD Server, includes IB2Go, but also additional tools from Idera. One is Aqua Data Studio from Aqua. It's a database management tool. A license for Sencha XJS Professional Edition for building web client application with the XJS JavaScript library. The multi-site deployment license for RAD Server that I'll highlight later. And for new Architect Edition purchases only, a license of Ranorex Studio, a term license for Ranorex Studio, which is a test automation tool also going to cover in this webinar. What we are not shipping anymore is ER Studio Developer and DB Power Studio. If you are an existing customer, you can retain the current license you have because that was a perpetual license, but we're not going to update and issue new licenses to people buying the Architect SKU from now on. So with that, let us start focusing on what is Aqua Data Studio and what's the purpose and why it would serve the RAD Studio customers.
Welcome to an overview video of Aqua Data Studio. Aqua Data Studio is a productivity tool for anyone working with data or databases. The foundation of the product was for developers and DBAs, and now the analyst community has really grown with the user base for Aqua Data Studio with the easy-to-use visual analytics. There are over 30 different database platforms supported by Aqua Data Studio, and it is a Java tool that installs on a Windows or a Mac, even a Linux client, and supports all the different variations of database installations from traditional RDBMS to NoSQL, on-premise or cloud environments. Here's a range of job titles of existing users of Aqua Data Studio. So of course the developer and DBA foundation, as well as analysts, really anyone that carries the word data in their job title or team name would benefit from using Aqua Data Studio. Some users use Aqua Data Studio more often than others. Here's a visual of all the database platforms supported, so there's really more than this list, but some of the vendor icons will be familiar to many of us. I also like to point out Excel on this list, so you can point to your Excel data sets and work on those as though they're a database table. And this list continues to grow with different versions, and then some of the Amazon hosted environments as well. Here's a list of primary features that we'll introduce within the demonstration, and some of these are some terminology to be familiar with. So no real hierarchy here. Developers might focus on certain areas more than others, but everyone will start with registering or connecting to a database, exploring or navigating, and then working on SQL or opening up SQL or PL SQL or stored procedures, T-SQL. So you have these core primary areas for any type of user. And then certain windows or floating standalone windows might be of interest to certain users. So you have the query builder, the table data editor, the visual analytics, the ER modeler, the schema compare features, import export data. These are all floating windows that can be launched in different ways or right-click menus. And then database administration features really are throughout the product, but included here, referencing the DBA Tools primary menu. Okay, so let's dive into the demonstration, and we'll close out with some of these areas and summary areas. But under Help About, you can see the version that is being shown, which is 19.0, and then there's a link to the user community. And so just to introduce the product page, Aquafold joined Idera and Embarcadero in 2017, and so the Aquafold website is still maintained, and here's the Aqua Data Studio product page. So there's a summary here of information about the product, and then the list of database platforms towards the bottom portion of this page. So look for this to continue to grow, and different database platforms and versions continue to be supported and added. Also, I like to point out some of the other links here. There's a resources page with lots of videos that would be beneficial, and then this product has been on the market for over 16 years, so it's a very mature product. About to release version 19.5, so look for continuing development and input from our user community. Okay, so I'm starting with a clean user interface here, but Aqua Data Studio has a flexible layout in terms of how you like to build your environment, and so you have some familiar concepts like pinnable or dockable pop-out windows. And you can see here some of those that I have displayed. On the left-hand side, I have my navigation tree to the different databases I'm connected to. And then on the right-hand side, I have my file system navigator, where I can have shortcuts to my own directory paths or map drives. Then within the user interface, you have the tabular query analyzer or tabular interface within the user application. And then floating windows. So you see from the primary menu, Query Builder, Visual Analytics, ER Modeler, those are examples of some floating windows and the flexibility to use those independently from the main user interface. So we'll introduce how to launch these in different ways, but let's start by talking about the primary toolbar and then the server main menu, where you see the very first icon on the main toolbar is how to connect to a database or register a server. And under Server, Register Server, you see that icon displayed as well. So this is the starting point for using Aqua Data Studio, is connecting to your databases. And then further down in the server main menu, you see other popular windows like the Query Analyzer or the Query Builder. So you can launch those through the server main menu, or you see these icons as well. So here's the Register Server icon, there's the Query Analyzer icon, there's the Query Builder icon. If I hover over the main toolbar, you see those as well. So there's the Register Server, there's the Query Analyzer, and there's the Query Builder. Okay, so if I right-click on the database server or register server or click on the very first icon, you can see the alphabetical list of database platforms supported by Aqua Data Studio. So this continues to grow, and as you select a connection, you'll see the areas of information needed would vary, depending on the database platform that you're selecting. So here I can see Amazon Redshift, Apache Hive, SQL Server, Oracle. So depending on which database platform you select, you'll see the text boxes that need to be populated. And here you have the flexibility of naming this connection in a way that makes sense to you, perhaps assigning a color coding to that connection, specifics for that database platform, and then the ability to customize these in different ways. If I right-click on an existing connection and go into the server properties, here you have features that you can customize in terms of how you name this, or perhaps duplicate or clone this connection, and then also the concept of server groups. And so you have the ability to group your connections in different ways that make sense to you. So right now I'm connected to a range of environments: MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, an Excel spreadsheet. And so this would be a familiar user interface in terms of the navigation tree and then the tabs on the right-hand side. Okay, so it always is beneficial to spend time navigating in the Explorer tree. And so depending on what database you're talking about, you can drill into the databases drill down, or schemas is used in certain environments like Oracle and DB2. So in Oracle, if I drilled into, say, my schemas drill down and drilled into an individual schema, I could see my tables and objects or stored procedures or stored code there. If I was navigating in, say, a SQL Server environment, I have my databases drill into my databases, and then I see my objects like tables, views, stored procedures, indexes. There's a lot of right-click functionality throughout the product, so that's a benefit. Right-click throughout the tool, and you'll find shortcuts to some of the primary features and main menus. So here, if I just open up a query analyzer and then selected a database, and I could just start typing SQL very easily and start invoking some of the IntelliSense and color coding and pop-up windows that you might expect in a mature tool like Aqua Data Studio, and then easily perhaps select a table or field and easily execute SQL with the green execution arrow. So here I could just click on the green run arrow and execute an individual SQL statement very easily. So these are familiar areas within a database tool that many of us are familiar with. Then you have very helpful productivity areas within the navigation tree to help save time in terms of, say, writing code for you automatically, where here I could easily right-click on a table and script a SQL statement or a DML statement to my query analyzer window very easily. So right-click, script object to window as a select statement or a qualified path, and these are easy ways of having the Aqua Data Studio script out SQL statements for me very easily. So then I can execute individual or multiple SQL statements. If I expand the query main menu, you can see descriptions of all the green run arrows, from parse to execute, execute current, execute edit, and the execution plan. So here I could execute just an individual SQL with a single green run arrow, or multiple SQL and bring back multiple tabs or result sets on the bottom portion of my screen. So far we've just introduced exploring the navigation tree and perhaps right-clicking or executing SQL through different windows in the query analyzers. And then if you right-click on different object types, you'll see certain features that are only enabled in the right-click menu. So if I right-clicked on a database, there I see Create, Alter, Drop Database. If I drill into my tables or views or object types, right-click there, I see Create Table, Alter, Drop Table. If I navigate into, say, Stored Procedures, for example, there I see other stored procedure features like debugging code or compiling code. So create, alter, drop, edit for compile, debug for stepping through code. So very familiar features, and you're encouraged to right-click throughout the navigation tree as a way to take advantage of Aqua Data Studio features. Okay, so you'll have multiple query analyzers open. Here's a, say, more complex SQL statement where I could execute that and bring back my result set, or perhaps look at the execution plan. So if you were responsible for looking at performance of SQL statements, that might be an area to explore. So you can right-click within your editor, and you have different formatting features and folding features that developers would find beneficial. Also, under the query main menu, you have the SQL history, which will show a history of any SQL you've executed over time, and you have the ability to customize how many statements are saved and even archive those. So right-click throughout the query analyzer as you're writing code, or expand the query main menu and you'll see different features that would be beneficial or perhaps expected in a mature tool like Aqua Data Studio. Okay, so let's keep moving here. So far we started with connecting server, register, server. Then we opened up some different query analyzers. To open up some of the other standalone windows, you can invoke those from the primary main menus, or again, right-click, right? So if I was to open up a query builder from the main menu, query builder new, you'd be asked, okay, what database are you working on? If you right-click on a connection, you'll save a click or two here, where here I could launch the query builder, and Aqua Data Studio knows that's the database I'm working on. So the query builder allows an easy way of building SQL if you're not an expert at SQL syntax, right? Where I could easily drag and drop a table to my white space and have the product or the query builder write SQL for me. So notice I dragged over a single table, there it writes select star, and I could execute that and bring back a result set. Or I could bring over multiple tables. If you have referential integrity between your tables, you'll see in the join line, you can drill into that join and make changes to the join properties, or start selecting or dragging and dropping tables or fields, rather, columns to the select field, and then you'll see your SQL customized that way. So if I wanted to just start double clicking or dragging and dropping to build SQL, perhaps I'm looking for certain fields in this example, and then here I could select from additional tables as well, see that customized SQL, and then execute that and bring back a subset of my data. From different windows, you have the ability to take action on your data. So here in the query builder, notice icons to export this data to Excel or send this to the visual analytics. So if you right-click within a result set, save results will have those capabilities as well. So if I was back to the query analyzer example that we were looking at earlier, here are the same icons as well. So I could send this data to Excel with a single click. Right, so maybe I'll just work with this single result set, send this data to Excel, or right-click, save results. This would have a more wizard-driven interface for exporting to different file formats, delimited files, Excel, for example. Okay, so that was the query builder, and of course that is a savable, shareable file. And so you can see in my navigation tree I have shortcuts to different reusable Aqua Data Studio artifacts, or file save as would allow me to save this. And the extension for query builder file is .qbw. Okay, so let's take a look at the visual analytics next. There's the query builder main menu, there's visual analytics. So again, if I open up visual analytics new, Aqua Data Studio will ask what's the data set you're working on. Otherwise, you have the ability to launch the visual analytics from an existing data set with the icon you see above the data grid. So for visual analytics, you have the ability to build worksheets and dashboards, and so you might want to have an idea of what data you're looking to work with. And so here's a good example to show some of the visual analytics capabilities where I have a business intelligence data set of some customer names and dates and sales. And so if I launch the visual analytics here, that would send that data to the visual analytics window and then separate my data into my dimensions and measures, where measures are my numerical values, dimensions are my non-numerical values. You do have the ability to customize these or convert those to a measure or dimension if that's how you consider that value. And then for those of you familiar with the visual analytics tool, you have the drag and drop white space and X and Y axes to start building your data visualizations. And so lots of customizations and flexibility with the tool where you can go back and forth in terms of steps or stories you're looking to tell and ways of displaying your data. So you have different types of charts and visualizations, and then customizations from there as well. So if I wanted to maybe start with a pie chart example and then drag and drop to my different columns and rows, X and Y axis, or user interface here, you have that flexibility, right? And so here, if I wanted to perhaps start with a bar chart comparison, right? So here I could drag and drop different values. Perhaps I'll bring over a profit value and then build a comparison to product names. And so here I brought over my profit value to my columns, my product name to my rows. But if you wanted to swap those, you could easily select swap rows and columns, or go back, and if you perhaps wanted to display that in a different way, you have that type of flexibility as well. So here's an example of, say, a comparison data visualization, and then the concept of a worksheet and the ability to build multiple worksheets or dashboards obviously exists here in the Visual Analytics component in Aqua Data Studio. So if I was to perhaps build a couple of other examples here, I could perhaps maybe choose that pie chart example, and then again, working with some of those same values, I could bring over, say, a profit value and then drag and drop into my chart properties, right? So here perhaps I'd like to see a pie chart of different sales per state, right? So here I could easily show that and label that in the pie chart type of example. So here's a bar chart, here's a pie chart. We also have geographical and size and labeling capabilities. So really flexible in terms of how you'd like to tell your data story. So here, maybe to give another example here, I could choose, say, a geographical chart properties, right? So here, if I maybe bring over my profit to my geography box and perhaps isolate that by territory or state in my geography box, this would display a geographical map of different regions of sales, for example. And then I could perhaps maybe duplicate this in a way that narrows down that region, right? So here I could isolate this data set and then perhaps just view this portion of my geography or world. So here I could say right click, say keep only, and then have a subset of my profit globally in terms of a region, and then I could also drag and drop into these chart property boxes as well. So you have flexibility here in terms of worksheets, and then the analysis capability would be enabled as well. So you have the ability to, build trend lines or reference lines, filters, calculated fields, lots of flexibility here. And then the concept of dashboards would be a combination of charts, right? So here I have existing worksheets. If I was to say select a new dashboard, then I could choose the existing worksheets to build that dashboard. So this, of course, can be saved as an Aqua Data Studio file, and that extension is a .vizw. And so you have the Query Builder extension, the Visual Analytics extension, and then a third one would be the ER Modeler files. So ER Modeler new would open up a new ER diagram, or perhaps say forward engineer an ER diagram where I could drag and drop objects and start forward engineering relationships and defining the structure of these objects or tables. Or reverse engineering might be a starting point. So ER Modeler generate, or if I was to say right click on a database connection, you see shortcuts to certain features under the tools menu or DBA tools drill down. So there's a shortcut to the ER diagram generator. Or if I was to launch that from the ER Modeler generate, you just point to the database that you're looking to diagram or reverse engineer, and then you'd see a capability to choose tables, views, indexes, constraints, and then turn that into a logical diagram, right? So you have navigation features that you might expect in terms of looking at different object types, and then of course scripting capabilities to generate the code, deploy that to different environments, to perhaps generate a report and provide a URL for users to see the physical model. And then also compare capabilities. So I could compare this with structure or existing models, right? So compare with model, compare with database. Even a convert is a helpful feature where maybe I need to move these objects from a certain platform, right? So maybe I have these objects in SQL Server. I'd like to convert those to, say, an Amazon environment. A couple of clicks, and you can easily build that code in a deployed platform. Okay, so moving a little bit quickly, but hopefully these are beneficial areas for anyone responsible for these features within Aqua Data Studio. And then we always like to introduce the tools menu and the DBA tools as other popular areas that are critical for performing your job responsibilities. So you have the ability to move data in or out of a database, right? So import data or export data would allow me to open up a tab against that platform, and then perhaps import values and step through a wizard that would allow me to populate this data within a database. And so depending on what data you're working with, you have the ability to import, say, from a text file or Excel spreadsheet, and then this could be a tabbed interface, or if I float this, I could right-click float this, and then you can see different steps to step through this next user interface. Okay, so that's an example of the combination of some windows are tabs within the application. Some can be floated as a standalone window. And then the compare features are very popular as well. And so this could almost be its own main menu, but you see you have about 7 different compare features, from a left and right hand schema compare or schema synchronize user interface that would be familiar to many of us, to the ability to do ad hoc compares from my existing tabs or result sets or file structure, and then provide side-by-side comparisons of source and target. Okay, so under the Help menu, you have resources that would allow you to learn more about Aqua Data Studio. Primary would be the online documentation. So Help Online Documentation has a wiki search capability for years and years worth of documentation of the product. So whether it's connecting to your different databases or some of the individual areas that we looked at, like the query builder, the visual analytics, and the ER modeler, all documented in great detail with screenshots and links for releases for many years of Aqua Data Studio. And then memory monitor, something we like to point out as well. Now that our machines are so powerful, if you have the ability to allocate more memory to Aqua Data Studio, that can be beneficial, and really with the all the memory we have in our client machines, that's a recommended setting where you can really take advantage of the client capabilities of our machines now. And then, of course, the user community. So we encourage you to join some of the reoccurring webcasts or visit here to learn more about the product, and even download and install the product very easily from the Aqua Data Studio homepage. Thank you for joining this presentation of Aqua Data Studio.
Next, we're going to focus on RunX Studio and understand how it can be used by Delphi developers to test their user interface.
Hello everyone. Let's take a look at how to use RunX Studio to create an automated test for a Delphi application built with RAD Studio. To download RunX Studio, open a browser and go to ranorex.com/free-trial. The RunX Studio evaluation screen appears. Click Start Free Trial. Ranorex Studio opens and the Rocket Start New Solution Wizard appears to walk you through the process of creating a test automation solution perfectly aligned to your needs. Switch to RAD Studio and start the application under test. This allows Ranorex Studio to identify the app and generate commands to start and close it automatically during test execution. Now, return to Ranorex Studio. The wizard configures the technology that you wish to test: desktop, web, or mobile. Or you can choose blank to create a new solution manually. Choose desktop. Give the solution a name. Let's call it First Test. Click Continue. Now, the wizard prompts you to select your application under test. Choose the Delphi app from the list of running applications. Click Continue. The recording behavior dialog appears with 3 options. Focus on single application whitelists the application under test so that Ranorex Studio ignores all other applications during test recording and test runs. This makes recording easier and helps your tests run faster. Focus on multiple applications allows you to select other applications to whitelist in addition to the already selected Delphi app. No focus applied allows Ranorex Studio to interact with any running processes. For now, let's choose Focus on Single Application to whitelist the application under test. You can change this later if desired. Click Continue. The next screen of the wizard explains what will happen when you click Finish. Your new solution will open and the First Steps tutorial will appear. click Finish. Now the Ranorex Studio user interface appears with your new solution. On the left, you see the Projects view. The top item in the hierarchy is the solution. This solution contains one project and all of the libraries and files required to execute that project. Below the Projects view, you see the Ranorex module browser. A module is a small unit of code that executes one or more test steps. You can combine modules to create sophisticated automated test cases. There are two types of modules: recording modules, which are created by the Ranorex recorder during a capture and replay session, and code modules, which are created by test automation personnel. Right now, the module browser contains 3 modules: one to close the application under test, one to open it, and a single empty recording. In the center of the screen is the File view. When you double-click on an item in the Projects window or the module browser, the associated file opens here. Double-click on the Recording 1 module to open it in the File view. Click Record. Ranorex Studio minimizes automatically, and the Ranorex recorder controls appear. Move your mouse over the user interface elements in the application under test. Notice the red box, which appears as the Ranorex Spy tool automatically identifies UI elements. Perform a workflow you want to test. Notice that your actions appear instantly in the recording history. Here, you can hover over the eye to see the screenshot for an action, or click the trash can to delete an action. It's also possible to add some types of action manually. Now, let's add a validation to check that your workflow works properly. To add a validation, click Validate. Highlight the element to validate. Look for the purple frame indicating that the UI element has been identified, then click it. The Select Element window opens. Verify that the screenshot shows the correct element to validate, then click Next. In the Validation Settings window, select which attributes to validate. Click OK to confirm and return to recording mode. Now, press the Stop button to stop recording. Finally, close the application under test. Your recorded test steps appear in the Action Editor. Here, you can manually add new actions, such as a mouse click or a key sequence, edit existing actions, reorder actions, and delete them. Below the Action Editor, you will see the repository items for the UI elements that Ranorex Studio identified while the test was being recorded. The name of each item comes from its properties. The Ranorex path uniquely identifies each UI item within the application under test. You can edit repository items in several ways. For example, you can manually add new items, you can change the names of existing items to make them more meaningful, and you can use the Edit in Spy function to change the path to the item. You can also delete repository items that aren't being used in an automated test. In the Action table, you see the repository item associated with each recorded action. Notice that when you click on an action, the associated repository item is highlighted automatically. You can also use repository items in code. To do so, create a new user code module by clicking the corresponding button in the menu. Then, simply drag and drop the repository item in the code editor and use it directly there. Refer to the Ranorex Studio user guide to learn more about code modules. Open the first test suite in the File view, and you will see that there is one test case with a setup and a teardown section. The Start AUT and Close AUT modules have been added to these sections for you. You can add the code module by simply dragging it from the module browser view to the test case where you want to execute it. Click the Run button to run the entire test suite. The test run report appears in the file view. Click the arrows next to the test case and the recording module for more details about the test runs, such as the results of the validation step. In addition to running a test suite from within Ranorex Studio, you can run test suites from the command line. For example, if you wish to launch test automation in your continuous integration pipeline. For more information, refer to the Ranorex Studio user guide. This test run was successful. To learn more about automating tests with Ranorex Studio, visit the resources section of the Ranorex website, where you will find informative articles about software testing, white papers, and screencasts for all levels of Ranorex users, from beginner to advanced. Or visit our webinars page and register for one of our free webinars, available live and on demand.
The next section is focused on Sencha XJS and the part of this JavaScript library, which can also be used as a front end for RAD Server web service applications.
Sencha generate app. I'm in Sencha command right now. It's spelled CMD, but it's our command line utility for being able to leverage our productivity for managing our builds in XJS. I want a universal application. This is going to allow me to work with both the classic toolkit and the modern toolkit at the same time. If I needed to work with one versus the other explicitly, I would just actually put a flag for the type that I wanted to use. Okay, so I'm going to give this a namespace so my code doesn't interfere with what other code might be running in the shared space at the time. So I'm going to call it tunes. I'm going to place it in a library called labs here and put it in a directory called tunes. There we go. All right. So when it generates an app, it has a local version of the library. It's a lot more streamlined than the trial version I downloaded here that has all kinds of samples in it. A lot of this is boilerplate and just infrastructure for being able to preserve the way that you'll work with the app once it's been generated, like being able to style your app and change its themes and things like that. So I want to go into labs now and to tunes. And from there, I want to generate my views for classic and for modern. So that view will be called main. Now that that was generated, inside of classic, I have 3 files that are integrated. So if you have a view that you want to have supported by specific data for that view and specific business logic for that view, you can have those wired up as separate files or separate classes where you can have a separation of concerns for how you address what gets done for that view. So this current main view that we have here, it simply says, we'll be saying hello world, can be supported by any kind of logic I want to have here, like the response to clicking of a button, or what happens when data is loaded, and the actual data itself can be managed here. Okay, so we'll take a look at that in a little bit. All right, so I will generate my other view for the classic side. So for the modern side here, I'm saying I want the base to be a low-level container. And then the modern directory, that's being built for me. Okay, and then I can create an app directory where I can have shared functionality that both the modern and the classic deployments can take advantage of. Okay, so I'm only going to build one file for that that will take advantage of that. We're going to call that application.js. And that's just kind of a go-to, I want to see how things start file, if you will, to be non-technical about it. All right, I'll borrow some quick code on the fly to demonstrate that, just in terms of being able to extend that file elsewhere. All right, so I'm not sure how well you can read the code, but you basically are, when you're creating a file, you have the namespace of whatever you call the app when you generated it. So that maps to your app directory. The application file that I just created here is kind of meant to be an easy file for another developer to find should they need to insert some sort of third-party synchronicity in terms of how the outside applications might work with your XJS application. So that will be extended from app.js, which is kind of the file that kicks everything off. I'm going to provide a simplified version of that. And a property of this is going to be main view. This is pointing to what is considered to be the landing page, if you will, or the first introductory component of your entire view of your application. So pointing to tunes.view.main.main means that a file called main inside of a subdirectory of main in a view for whatever deployment we're using. So classic and modern happen to be using the same ones here, is what those will be pointing to. And the HTML config that we see here, the key value pair in an object definition that we have, is specifying just show some HTML at this point, and we're just saying the text of hello world. All right, the application will kick off from index.html. So it's a pretty straightforward straightforward document that has one script tag that is responsible for leveraging all other JavaScript that would be necessary for your application to run. So you want to minimize the amount of script tags for performance reasons that you have in your application, because each one represents an independent call across the network, and you want to limit those. So the microloader in a single script tag takes care of that particular dynamic. All right, so what I commented out here is this before load script that you see here. This is responsible for being able to display or load up whichever toolkit it should respond to in the browser. So if the browser is a pre-HTML5 browser, then it will load up Classic by default. If it is HTML5 enabled, then it'll load up the modern side by default. I'm stressing default because you can override that script and decide that you want to have it display by other means. And there's certainly an easy walkthrough for showing you how to do that too. All right, so with that set up in play, let me make sure there we go. So my my app.js file is extending from that intermediate application.js file I mentioned before. It's not necessary, but it turns out to be pretty handy when those that aren't familiar with XJS just want to be able to jump in and make a quick tweak to how the application may be working or changing a value that's being passed to it. So it's an easy find for that. All right, when you are ready to set up your app to run it in the browser, I'm going to run just a Sencha command, and this is called the Jetty web server. So I'm in the demo here. I'm going to say Sencha web start. You don't have to use this if you don't want to. I'm just showing off the Sencha command features. All right, so something's already running in that regard. So I'll just stop that, start it again. And I also want to sync all my JavaScript constructs that I'm going to create with the ability to have CSS styling it. So I'm going to say, no, I'm going to go into Sencha, then Labs, then Tunes. All right. So I want to say Sencha app build development. And while that is running, we'll take a look at why that's necessary. We basically have a global configuration file here called app.json. This is where I can make across-the-board changes of all my files of different settings I may need. So that can be anything from a library that's embedded into the app, like the Font Awesome suite of icons that I want to use within my app. It could also be, if I scroll down here, for the particular builds that I have, it could be whatever theme that I want to use. So for my classic build in this configuration file, I can decide to use a different theme than I might need for my modern build. Okay, so those are specifications I can make across the board for the entire app. All right, so loading localhost here now. Should give me entrance to my application. And it just says on the classic side, hello world, in a very small fashion. Because it's HTML, I can make it look larger than that. So my display of main here Simply just put an H1 in there as a placeholder. Okay. And then if I want to see the modern side, this is just all set up, but just to show you how easy it is to get in place. So there that is there. And then on the modern side, if I wanted to, I could just put this in a span, whatever HTML you want to use, including working with style attributes as well. There we go. All right. So saving that, refreshing that. Okay. So throwing the argument of modern in the browser and while you're working on your app, that will generate that for you. Okay. So just with that simple, very, very simple setup that we have here on purpose, we have access to both builds, and we can create logic that both can take advantage of. Okay. Let me just see if I can open that back up. There we go. All right. Now, it's important to note that for anything that simple, there's still a lot of rendering to the browser going on. So if I inspect this in my Elements tab, even for something as simple as that to start, this is all the rendering that's kind of being pre-done for anything you might want to add or include after the fact in your browser. Okay. Again, everything's being converted to divs and to styles and the like. All right. So to show off some of the data package aspect of what this can do, we're going to fetch some data that we want to absorb. So the data that we want to absorb is going to be coming from iTunes. So what this gives me is some metadata about popular videos of the day that we can play around with. So we want to be able to absorb that into our app at runtime and be able to leverage it in one way or another. Okay. So to be able to access the data from the data package, there's a feature called a proxy. To be able to massage the data once we have it, once it's inside of our app, there's a feature called a model that's going to allow us to do that. Okay. So we're going to combine those two together. In the interest of time, I'm just going to copy and paste that. So I'm going to create what's called a model. It's kind of the template for how we want each of our entries from that data to be implemented in our application here. So in my directory for Classic to start, like I said, because we don't have time to build both sides, I'm going to create a directory for it and call it model. And models are meant to be singular, so I'll create a file in there called tune.js. All right, so some features I have from the model are some pretty straightforward features. So models are a great, powerful implementation in XJS. So we're barely scratching the surface here. So again, you can have multiple models that are related to each other if you wanted to, much the way you can have tables in a database relate to each other. But for now, we're going to use two main features. One is to redefine a lot of the values that we have in the original feed so that they're easier to manipulate in our code in our examples we're showing you here. So sort of a dated feature, but we're just basically changing the mapping of what the actual location of the data we're interested in is in the data feed to being a simple reference here. So it's easier for us to code and work with instead of dealing with all these quotes and semicolons and opening and closing brackets. So that takes care of that. So in our fields array will allow us to do that. Fields arrays are also responsible for things like creating custom sorters for data. They're responsible for things like doing a different kind of data type that you might want to have. Instead of something coming in as a string, if you want it to function as a date object, you can do that. And then this proxy here is going to be responsible for accessing the data by whatever means we want. So usually it's going to be an AJAX calls if it's within the same domain. If not, then you have other means of doing so. There's REST as options. I'm using JSONP because we're going to make a read from a public feed. So it's going to allow us to do that. And the amount of data I'm actually absorbing into my app, I'm specifying to be a subset of the entire set. So that's helpful for when we have really large data sets that we're pointing to. So notice off to the right here, my scroll bar is really small, meaning I have a lot of data there. But if I collapse the data feed itself, there's a node called feed inside of which I have a node called entry, and I'm ignoring the rest of the availability of the data from that feed. And instead, I'm just concentrating on the part that lives in feed.entry. Okay? And that's what we're going to be absorbing from this URL. All right, so I can save that, and I can have that be referenced from the data management portion of our view, and that can be done from our data management support file of our view, and that's the view model here. So the view model will be called main model, which right now just has a placeholder of a data object for us. We can replace to have what's called a store. So in the view model, you have different blocks of ways of dealing with data. So a store is going to be a way that you can reference multiple records provided for a view in several ways. We're going to be using binding. All right, so I'm going to create that store. I'm going to call it tunes. So I might be able to swap some code so you don't have to watch me. All right, so what we've done here is allowed for an alias. So the alias just means the means by which we're going to have this file be referenced from our main view that's actually already loading in the browser. And we're going to create a store called tunes that references that model that we just created for how the data is treated for every multiple record that's going to be output from that proxy that we saw in tune.js. At the end of that URL, you may have noticed that it has that limit of 50, saying how many records we're going to get back. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and I'm going to refresh the browser. So no errors, but how do I know I got my data? I haven't wired the data up to anything in the view yet. I just want to confirm that it actually is available for me to manipulate with my components once that data is there. So some people would prefer to work from building components and wiring the data to it after the fact. I like to work from the data and have my views suit my data. So we have troubleshooting commands you can use in Next.js in the browser to be able to test behavior. So there's an ext.first call that you can use by leveraging the X type, which we haven't assigned yet. So I'm going to give it one here. And X type is a hook that you can use both for aliasing into other classes or for being able to use it as a troubleshooting mechanism. So I'm going to use it for the latter as a troubleshooting mechanism and call it main. Okay, so I'll save that, and that's the hook I can use to be able to confirm that I have access to that object in the browser. So far I don't. Let me try that again. There we go. So that returned an object. So that confirms that this what I'm seeing here is actually reflecting what I coded. And now from that, I can call up different properties of what I extended from. I extended from this component called a panel. So there's things about that I can manipulate. So what I want to do is I want to find out if the corresponding view model to this view, so I'll say get view model. And I want to make sure that exists, and I get an object for that too. And I want to be able to find out about the store in the view model that's called tunes. Oops. All right, and I got an object back for that. I'm expecting 50 returns, so there's even a method called getCount, where it can confirm that I got 50 returns back, and I did. Okay. So you have troubleshooting methods that you can use in the browser for your XJS apps that makes it a lot easier and simpler to test what's going on or to try out different things without actually disturbing your actual code. You can do that just as well with actual live ext applications that are running in on real servers in actual deployment, and figure out and test and play around with what they did as well and learn from it. All right, so now that I have the data available, I want to wire up a view to my data. So I want to use a certain kind of component to do so. So the component I'm going to use is going to be a data view. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. One, I'm going to create a separate file to be able to compose that. So I'll create one view and just get the data wired up to that. Outside of my main directory, but inside of my view directory, I'll create a new file. I'll call it tunes view. And I will have the following code. And so this is called tunes view. It's in the view directory just by itself. It doesn't need to have its own directory because there's no supporting logic and data necessary for this. We're extending from the view data view class that has certain properties that allows you to absorb records and inject them with HTML and CSS. That's what this item template is doing here. So it's embedding the reference to the image that I made in the model and the title and the artist into a basic figure component here. Okay, so I'll save that. Whoops, not yet. Sorry, I have my view, but I need to actually wire that up. Okay, so this alias that it has here, this X type of tunes view, I'm going to use that in main view in main.js because that's what is displaying here to wire that to the data. All right, so to do that, I need a couple of things. One is that placeholder of HTML has got to go because that will just override anything else I'm trying to do. Instead, I need to work with what's called an items array. An items array is an array of objects that are the children of that main view. And through the X type of tunes view that you saw me assign to that outward class, I can reference an instance of it for how it's supposed to display. Okay. Then a property of that view that I just loaded in as a child can be bound to the store that I call tunes in the view model. Okay. So the tune store that's here, that's leveraging the model settings that we had before, is being brought into main through what we're calling a binding. This is not the only way to have a store come in to your view. You could have created an instance from a dedicated store class if you wanted to. But just so you're aware of how binding works, I thought I'd demonstrate this. Sorry, need to add one more thing here. I'm adding a reference to tunes view in what's called a requires array. And basically what that means is you want to be able to have your final build of your application reflect only the JavaScript files that are necessary for your app to run and ignore all the rest. That way you are confirming that there's a one-to-one relationship between all the files that you write and the files that have to be part of the build to be part of your application that runs in the browser, and no more. The idea is to isolate and filter off those that aren't necessary because you need your app to be as small as it can possibly be. That still doesn't want to work, and the reason why is I called it tunes view. There we go. All right, so the main display here is now happening by simply what I put in that item template. Okay, so each one of these reflects the fact that I wanted to have a image referenced in the image tag. Okay, so image is pointing to a URL from the feed that says display the image at this size, and the same is true for title that you see here and artist. Those are coming from directly from the feed through the model for that simpler reference that I made to it. Again, that's a role that a model. That's one of the roles that a model can implement. If you will indulge me for a couple more minutes here, we can make that view look a little bit more interesting using Sass variables with styling. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a file in the same directory as the tunes view file. I'm going to give it the same name as the tunes view file, only with a different extension. So let me select that. Let me find out why I can't find the features that I want. Give me a second here. There we go. So tunesview.scss. So not CSS, but SCSS, which is Sass. And I'll just take some basic styling here. In a perfect world, I'd definitely rework this some more, but we should be able to get a hint of how this works. All right. So all these are SAS variables that are available to us through specifications as how we can work with CSS on a component by component basis in the XJS library. So that's something that certainly can be looked up. But one of the things we're looking to do with our SAS is to not have the default stacking of the objects like we have here, to be able to have those be displayed more like a checkerboard, if you will. All right. And we need to be able to, now that these styles exist, we need to be able to have ToonsView actually talk to them. So much like we have an item template for the basics of what we have here, we need a item class. I'm just doing the spacing for clarity's sake, to reference the classes that we're actually using in that style sheet. So there's a couple of configs: item class for a record by record basis in a data view, and over item classes, what you do when you hover over it. Okay. So I'm going to do a couple of tweaks to that style sheet. So in addition to providing a border, I'm going to provide a border radius. And I'm going to make my animation be a little bit more dramatic. Make sure I've got that covered. This is Chrome. Yes, good. And make that 0.5 millisecond. No, that's not right. 500 milliseconds. All right. The other thing I have to do is tell the build that this style sheet is now part of the app. So again, that is essentially app build development. I'm going to run that again. You don't always have to do this. There's a command you can use called Sencha app watch that does a continuous build in the background of your app. Hopefully those errors aren't a problem. We'll see in a second. So that as you're in the CSS part of developing your application, you can see automatically updated right away, everything happening and installing right away. Except I have an unexpected token somewhere. But now the CSS just has full control of being able to fully transform what you saw from before. So on a case-by-case basis, you can style things the way that you want, or you can take the default display that it gives you from that item template. Okay, so between the two, you should really be able to customize all your markup and inject it with your data.
And in the last section of this webinar, I want to introduce you to RAD Server, focusing shortly on its key features, doing a quick demo, and highlighting the licensing options that you have for RAD Server with RAD Studio Architect Edition. First of all, why should you consider RAD Server? The idea behind it is to rapidly connect your application to your enterprise databases and other enterprise services, whether these databases and this middle tier is hosted on premise or in a cloud infrastructure. What you most likely need these days is to make the enterprise data available outside of the original location, to make it possible for end user devices, including mobile phones, to access it while keeping the infrastructure secure. RAD Server is an architecture that lets you write your own API, but providing a lot of features. For example, the API calls analytics or user and groups management, along with other capabilities that are available out of the box. The idea behind RAD Server, in fact, is to be a turnkey solution for RAD Studio developers that comes with a lot of ready-to-use features rather than starting with a library but having to build everything yourself. RAD Server comes with user and groups management, the ability to use multi-tenancy to separate groups and users for different customers in different databases, detailed analytics, support for push notifications for mobile devices, support for documentation with the Swagger API, beacon fencing and other IoT integrated features, and more. It's a great solution for building your microservice architecture or any web service you need, but it is a great solution if you have existing code to access databases, maybe part of our client-server architecture or an existing multi-tier architecture written with Delphi and C++ Builder, and you want to migrate to a modern, clean, scalable solution ready for the cloud. For the client side, you can use VCL apps, the same apps you have today maybe. You can use FireMonkey mobile applications and multi-device application, or use JavaScript, for example XJS, for building the client side. And of course, you can mix and match these technologies. The overall architecture of RAD Server is RAD Server sits on the server, exposes a REST API, and then using HTTP or HTTPS, any client device, whether it's a desktop, a mobile, whether via browser or via a native app, can access the APIs and to the data that RAD Server exposes. There is also a console application which you can browse using HTTP that provides the analytics and some information about users, user management, status, tracking, and more. I don't have the time for doing a full demo of RAD Server and covering all of its capabilities. The idea is to just do a very quick demo covering some of the new features that we have made available in RAD Studio 10.3, specifically the ready-to-use server-side components. There is a lot of content available already about RAD Server, its role, some of the advanced features, the ability to use it with a XJS front end, and I don't want to repeat that information because here my focus is mostly to highlight the value that RAD Server provides to architect customers. So let me do a demo of the new ready-to-use components for RAD Server in RAD Studio 10.3. What I want to do here is create a new RAD Server package. RAD Server applications are built-in packages that are loaded in RAD Server itself. I want to create a package with a resource. I want the wizard to provide me a starting point. I'm going to call the resource arc because this is an architect webinar, and pick a data module. But I'm not going to get endpoints with the skeleton of the API that you need to implement because I'm going to use components rather than writing methods to return the data. I'm going to use components and customize those components instead. Here is my data module. What I need to do is to grab a table from the data set. By doing so, I have a connection configured and I have a query that I'm actually going to customize. I don't really need to get all fields. So what I'm going to do is paste in a slightly different query. So this is my query. Let me test it locally. It works fine. Now what I need to do to expose this query as service, returning JSON, is to go in the tools palette and grab the EMS dataset resource, hook it to the dataset, pick the action that I want to implement, which is get an individual record and list. And also I want to make sure a paging is enabled, which it is, and go for a smaller page in terms of page size. Now there are many other configurations, but for this simple demo, that should be enough. What I also need to do is not to write any code, but to decorate this object, this component, with two resource suffix. I want to make sure this component receives any request for list, so access to the entire, with the slash to the entire object or entire resource, or when I'm typing slash and a number, that's going to be mapped to the employee number field in the database, return a single record, and return that as response. So I need to use these two attribute declarations to do the mapping of my component to the resource name. Now, if I run this application, I need to add some additional packages. It opens the module in RAD Server. If I go to the browser, I hit the main location, which is the version URL. Now I'm going to use arc to actually access the entire table. If I add a parameter called page, which is what the component indicates, and I set a value, I'm going to get only one page of data. And instead, if I go for an individual record with the specific URL / for example 15, I get back one individual record, the JSON for one individual record in the database. So we could achieve this behavior just by dropping a component, configuring it, adding a declaration, but without any actual code. And we could easily also implement updating deleting and creating new records in the same table just by enabling the matching features in the component and in the code. Again, there are several extensive demos that we have already made available, for example, for Code Rage, in blog posts, and in other resources if you want to delve into RAD Server capabilities in general or in RAD Studio 10.3 in particular. Overall, the RAD Server architecture is a critical architecture. This is a diagram that we actually got from a third party, from a customer, and highlighting how they're envisioning an entire architecture based around RAD Server as an application server. They are going to build web clients with XJS, native mobile clients, and use some of the existing VCL clients, have the data available through the internet from firewall, and behind it using RAD Server, actually multiple instances of RAD Server on different physical machines, but part of the same infrastructure. They want to have host microservices that use the database. Some of them use in-memory tables for performance. Some of them hook to legacy solutions or enterprise services. And using a web server in front of the engine for, again, managing some of the enterprise services and providing a gateway towards the RAD Server engine. So this is an example of a modern architecture that is made possible from RAD Server, and for which they might be able to reuse some of the existing code in terms of the VCL client and in terms of the data access logic and some of the legacy applications. As I was mentioning, one of the reasons for covering RAD Server in this webinar is that we have expanded the licensing for the deployment of RAD Server with the Architect Edition. The development tools for RAD Server are all available. They're included in Enterprise Edition, and this includes a debug version of RAD Server with limited capabilities, really meant for debugging and for development. When you're deploying, we recommend deploying with Apache or IIS, and of course you can deploy both on Linux and on Windows. The Enterprise Edition of RAD Studio includes a single site deployment license for RAD Server. So if you're using it for your internal company, you can deploy it on one location, while the Architect Edition includes free deployment and multi-site deployment. So you can deploy on both in-house, on your customers' locations, or in the cloud with multiple separate configurations. So in summary, RAD Studio 10.3 Architect includes the power of RAD Studio Enterprise, the additional deployment license for RAD Server, Aqua Data Studio, XJS Professional Edition, Ranorex Studio, and altogether it provides a very significant added value on top of the core RAD Studio product. Compared to the past, we have a more wide array of features and technologies that are part of RAD Studio Architect. We think it's additional value for developers that use RAD Studio. And with that, we can open it for any question you have.